Tennessee State Standard US.04. This is a big state standard. It wants you to analyze the causes and consequences of Gilded Age politics and economics, as well as the significance of the rise of political machines, major scandals, civil service reform, and the economic difference between farmers, wage earners, and industrial capitalists, including the following: spoils system and President James Garfield's assassination, Boss Tweed, Thomas Nast, the Pendleton Act, the Credit Mobilier, and the Interstate Commerce Act. The Gilded Age was a time in American history that went from roughly 1877 to the year 1900. And the Gilded Age was a time period in America. It wasn't a great time. It wasn't like a time that most people would choose to go back and live in. It was a tough time unless you were one of the few rich people that existed. But the term Gilded Age, where it comes from this famous quote by Mark Twain, this famous American writer. And his quote said, "The golden gleam of the gilded surface hides the cheapness of the metal underneath." So technically what gilded is something that something that's covered in gold. So it's something that's covered in gold. So what Mark Twain was saying, he's saying that this time period, this Gilded Age, it on the outside it looked great, that it looked pristine, it looked golden, it looked expensive, important. But in reality, so on the outside, things look good, but on the inside is where you see the real characters. So the inside looks cheap, or is cheap. And this sums up this Gilded Age. It's going to be a time period where, as you can see in this picture down here, there's a lot of industrial progression, like a lot of factories are being built, a lot of big things are happening in the United States. But when you really get down to it and you look at what it's like for these poor people, their lives are terrible. Okay, it's wrapped in gold, but in the middle, it's nothing fancy. One of the first bad things that happened during the Gilded Age, or a great example of this cheap underlayer that existed in the Gilded Age, is the rise of what are called political machines. Political machines were a very controlling, a very corrupt thing during the Gilded Age. And your most famous political machine is Tammany Hall. But before we go into the Tammany Hall and who they were, let's just kind of define what a political machine is. A political machine is where, or it's when you try to build a machine that always elects you. So you're trying to find a way as a politician to build this machine, this group of people that are always going to vote for you, that are always going to elect you anytime that there's an election. And the way these political machines worked is they didn't work always in the nicest sense. They're not always concerned about making America a better place. They're concerned about always winning elections. So what a lot of times these political machines would do is they would go out and they would do favors for people. And these favors would be exchanged for votes. So, you might live in a neighborhood that's really, really rough, and you might, want a playground for your kids. Well, these political machines that would come in and they would build a playground for your kids. So on the surface, it looks great. They're doing good things. But in reality, once they built you that playground, you were going to vote for them, and they were going to make sure you voted for them. And that's kind of how it worked. They exchanged favors for votes. So the most famous political machine, bar none, is this group called Tammany Hall. What Tammany Hall is, I'm going to put down that they're a political machine in New York City. And they're by far the most famous. And at their height, they ran New York City for a very, very long time. And this is exactly what they would do, this political machine. They would go out, they would do favors for people in exchange for votes. And the thing about Tammany Hall is it didn't just, they would do these nice favors and then people would vote for them. Tammany Hall made sure they were going to enforce that people voted for them. And sometimes, most of the time, through violence. The most famous person in Tammany Hall is this guy right down here. Okay, this is Boss Tweed. So who Boss Tweed is? Just put down. I'm gonna put down. He's the most famous boss for. I'm just gonna put TH for Tammany Hall. Okay, and what a boss is the highest level you can achieve in Tammany Hall. Okay, so boss is it's the highest level. And I'm gonna put TH again for Tammany Hall. So once you achieve boss, you were the one that was running for election. You weren't the one that was going around doing favors for people. You had people that did that. But a boss is the guy that's running for election. And Boss Tweed at his height, I mean, he's gonna be mayor of New York City. He's gonna run New York City. And the thing about Boss Tweed and all this Tammany Hall is they were corrupt. So when they became power, they're gonna try to take stuff from people. That's all they're really trying to do. They're gonna embezzle money. They're all worried about themselves. So Boss Tweed is gonna rule New York City until this guy Thomas Nast steps up. And Thomas Nast is a really important person in American history, because he's going to be credited with the downfall of Tweed. And the way he did this is, kind of unexpected. Who Thomas Nast was, he was a political cartoonist. Meaning he drew cartoons making fun of things. And one of the people that he made fun of was Boss Tweed. And he made fun of him by drawing these cartoons that are going to try to alert people to these things that he is doing. And eventually, Thomas Nast's cartoons become so famous that they actually do end up taking down Boss Tweed. Warrant is issued for his arrest. Boss Tweed actually escapes to Spain, and Spanish police identify Boss Tweed by the cartoons that Thomas Nast had drawn and send him back to the United States to serve out his jail sentence. So you can just see just how powerful these cartoons were by Thomas Nast. These right here are two cartoons that are just excellent examples of the cartoons drawn by Thomas Nast. So these are both Thomas Nast cartoons. And these are cartoons that you will see a lot whenever you're talking about Boss Tweed, Tammany Hall, Thomas Nast. And so let's start on this one over here on the left. On the left, you've got Boss Tweed, is who this is supposed to be. So Boss Tweed, we didn't talk about it last slide. Boss Tweed was a big boy, okay? He's over 6 foot. He's over 300 pounds. He's a big dude. And so part of it, it works on one level. He's making fun of Boss Tweed for being a larger man. Whatever. But the main thing that you should notice immediately, I hope you notice, about this cartoon is what's replaced Boss Tweed's head. Right? It's a giant bag of money. And so the question it asked here is essentially, why in the world is there this giant bag of money on Boss Tweed's head? Well, I mean, it's pretty simple if you really think about it. He's saying money is on his mind. The only thing that is motivating Boss Tweed is money. All right, he's motivated solely by money. And the way Boss Tweed made his money was, he cheated New York City out of it. What he did is he created fake companies. And these fake companies, so let's put out, he created fake companies. And what these fake companies did is they did services for New York City, but they really didn't do anything. He would make a trash collection service. And so on Tuesday, everybody in New York City is supposed to have their trash out ready to collect. Well, on Tuesday, nobody comes and picks the trash up. The next Tuesday, same thing. Nobody ever showed up, but New York City was charged for that. And all of that money is coming straight here into this guy's pockets. Okay, because money's on his mind. He's embezzling, he's stealing money. This other picture on the right, this is another Thomas Nast cartoon. Now, this is not Boss Tweed. This is what I call one of Boss Tweed's thugs. All right, what the thugs were this lower level in Tammany Hall, and they're the ones who did the favors and enforced the votes to go the way they were supposed to. So what this thug over here is doing is he's leaning on what's called a ballot box. That's what this is right here. So back in the day when they voted, people would come and they would write their vote on a ballot, and they would place it inside the box. So when it's time to vote in New York City, you go up to the ballot box and you're getting ready to cast your vote, and standing right there beside the vote is this big dude from Tammany Hall, and he is watching what you're voting. And remember, they would do favors for people in exchange for votes. So if you go to vote and you vote incorrectly, First off, they remind you, hey, remember that playground we built for you? Yeah, make sure you vote correctly. But if you still vote incorrectly, these thugs are going to take you outside, beat the crap out of you, and send you in to vote again. And that's the way they worked. Okay, that's what thugs were. They were the ones that went out and got the votes for Tammany Hall. So I'm going to put down that they went out and got votes for Tammany Hall. Okay, and it was all a part of this machine. So, I mean, this should show you just how corrupt it is. People are getting the crap beat out of them at ballot boxes. People are being bribed, essentially, to vote certain ways. So it just shows us how corrupt America is in this Gilded Age. Another great example of just how bad the Gilded Age was comes with this guy over here on the right. This is President James Garfield. Okay, James Garfield kind of has a sad history as president of the United States. He doesn't last very long. And the reason he doesn't last very long is because of something called the spoil system. Okay, what the spoil system is, the spoil system existed during the Gilded Age. And essentially what it would happen when a president is elected. He gives away jobs to his supporters. And this would happen a lot whenever these new presidents get elected. They would have a lot of people that they owed favors to. So what these presidents would go out and do is they would start hooking these guys up with these different government jobs. And this was something that happened, a lot during the Gilded Age. These people would give these people that had donated their campaign jobs. But the problem with this is when you're given these important government jobs, some of these people don't deserve these jobs. They're not qualified. But what qualified them was they gave money. So they were giving these jobs out to supporters. So President James Garfield gets elected. He actually fought in the Civil War for the Union. Very famous guy. But he gets elected, and just like every other president did during the time period, is he gave away jobs to his buddies. So let's just put down that he gets elected and gives jobs to his buddies. And don't think that, Garfield was any different than any other president. Everybody was doing this. It's just Garfield is going to pay a higher price than everybody else. So what happens? Garfield gives everybody that he thinks that he owes a job to, gives them a job, but he forgets one guy. Okay, he forgets this guy named Charles Guilletou. Okay, and Charles Guilletou is probably the one guy that you don't want to forget. Okay, so I'm going to put Charles Guilletou here. He's kind of got a funny last name. But Charles Guilletou didn't get a government job. Okay, and since Charles Guilletou didn't get a government job, he was upset. And he really felt like he deserved one. So what Guilletou decides to do is he travels to Washington, D.C., brings this pistol with him, knocks on the front door of the White House. Now, understand, security for the White House was not like it was back then. All right, they answer the door. I'd like to speak to the president. Come on in. The president's eating dinner. Walks into the White House, pulls out his pistol, shoots Garfield in the back, kills him. And so, you can see here, all because the reason he didn't get a government job, and because of that, he shot the president. So something has to be done, right? We've got to fix this. We can't have people getting upset because they don't get jobs and going to the White House and shooting the president. So the next president who comes in is this guy called Chester Arthur. And Chester Arthur is going to fix this. Chester Arthur says, we can't have this happen anymore. So he's going to create what's called the Pendleton Act. And what the Pendleton Act did is pretty simple. It made an examination, let's put exam, for all government jobs. So whenever a president gets elected, yeah, he can go out and he can give his buddies jobs. But his buddies have got to be able to pass a test. And the test is made to prove that they are qualified for that job. So you can try to give, your best friend from middle school who failed college or who failed basic math, he can be in charge of the taxes. You can give him that job, but he's got to pass the test. And if he doesn't pass the test, he doesn't get the job. So this is a great reform. This reform still exists today. It really is a safeguard against poor people getting government jobs. Okay, it's going to make sure that more qualified people get government jobs. Let's just write that down. So more qualified people get government jobs. Now, there are still going to be some idiots who get government jobs. That's the way it goes. But Pendleton Act is going to result in more qualified people getting these jobs. One of the big scandals that happened during the Gilded Age, other than the spoil system, was the credit mobilier scandal. And this is a very big scandal that's going to result in the government getting cheated out of a lot of money. It's going to be really important. But the details of this scandal, we're going to try to make it as simple as possible here. The credit mobilier scandal had to do with the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. I'll put TR for Transcontinental and RR for Railroad. So we're building this railroad across the United States. We've already talked about this. It's going to meet in Promontory Point. It's going to connect the east side of the United States with the west side. Makes it to where people can travel across the country easier. But the way this railroad was supposed to be built is the two companies that were building the railroad, they were being paid in government lands. So every mile of track they laid, they get more government lands. Now, the thing is, whenever they would build the railroad, and they were to get to like a really big project for the railroad, like for instance this bridge down here, okay, the way it was supposed to work is they were supposed to bring in different construction companies who would bid on doing the work. So you're going to build this bridge. You're going to bring in 3 companies, 1, 2, and 3. Those are your 3 companies' names. They got very creative with their names and chose 1, 2, and 3. So company 1 comes out to talk to the railroad company, and they say, look, that's a big bridge. It's going to take a lot of work. We could probably build that bridge for $10,000. All right, easy enough. Company 2 comes out. They look at it. They kind of say the same thing. They go, man, that's a pretty impressive bridge. We could do it for right at $15,000. Company 3 comes out, they look at it, and they say, yeah, that's a tough bridge, you guys are right. Tell you what, we could probably do that bridge for $50,000. So you've got 3 bids. And assuming that all companies do the same quality work, you should obviously pick company A. They're the cheapest one, assuming they do the same quality work. But the problem with the credit mobilier scandal with the Union Pacific Company that was building west from Omaha, Nebraska, the problem is every time they did work, they always kept picking the highest priced company, which doesn't make any sense because if assuming they do the same quality work, you should pick the cheapest. But they kept picking the highest priced companies. So let's just put that down. The Union Pacific always picked most expensive company. And, upon further investigation, what everybody found out is this company, the highest bidding one, it was always the same company. It was this company called the Credit Mobilier. And that's where the scandal gets its name from, the Credit Mobilier scandal. So upon further digging, our government eventually finds out that the people that own the Credit Mobilier are also the owners of the Union Pacific. So what's happening here is the Union Pacific, who owns the Credit Mobilier, is building to do these projects, overcharging the government, and then picking their own company, the most expensive one, to do the work. And where do you think that extra money is going? That extra money is going straight into the pockets of the Union Pacific. So they're cheating the U.S. government out of millions. It's a genius scandal, and they make a ton of money before the government catches them. So it just shows just how corrupt the building of the Transcontinental Railroad was, how they cheated the government out of millions by overcharging it to build these different projects. The last thing that's going to show the corruption of the Gilded Age is with this group called the Grangers. And the thing about the Grangers is it doesn't just show the corruption, it shows some things are getting fixed. All right, not all's bad. The Gilded Age, most things were really, really bad, but the Grangers show that something's getting fixed. So who are the Grangers? The Grangers are pretty simple. They're farmers who fought railroad monopolies. Okay, so pretty simple. These railroad monopolies, they owned all the railroad tracks, and they were really hurting farmers. The reason they're hurting farmers is these railroads, let's put down the railroads, were overcharging farmers. So these farmers, whenever they're trying to transport their goods to market, they're having to pay these ridiculous rates to use the railroad. So the farmers unite, they form this political party called the Grangers, and they're going to fight back against these railroad monopolies. And when they fight back against them, what they create is what's called the Interstate Commerce Act. And this is a really important reform. It's one of the few reforms that happens during the Gilded Age. Most of the Gilded Age was just about corruption, these bad things. But what the Interstate Commerce Act did is it made laws that made railroads charge reasonable rates. So these railroads could no longer just overcharge farmers. They had to give them fair rates. And the railroads could still make money, but they couldn't overcharge these poor farmers. And this cartoon right here is a perfect example of the Grangers. Okay, you've got, if you look at the cartoon, it's pretty simple. You've got all these people laying underneath the railroad tracks, okay, and they're oblivious. This guy's reading the newspaper, this guy's smoking a cigarette. They're just kind of relaxing. But there's one person who's not underneath the railroad tracks. It's the farmer over here. It's the Granger. And so what the Granger is doing is he's pointing out to the people. He says, look, you're in danger. This railroad over here, this train, is about to come through here and crush every single one of you. So the message of this cartoon is pretty simple, is that the Grangers, they're the ones who see the evil of the railroad. And they're the ones who are trying to save the American people from these evil railroad companies. They're trying to alert them, hey, you're about to be crushed. Or, hey, I'm being overcharged, which means you're going to have to pay more for your food. Listen to me, I'm going to fix this thing.